about a hot issue, right? Women in the mosques. What exactly is the issue here? I just don't get it. I mean, women, they need to pray. This is a mosque, a house of worship. Maybe the women should be in the mosque. And when they do allow the women in the mosque, they talk about it like it's some special mosque feature, you know? MashaAllah, we have intizam for ladies. We have a dungeon. It is a very nice dungeon. And mashallah, we have an excellent sound system, but it's not working. And we have a wonderful cooling system during the hot summer months. We have 2 fans. When it is 116 degrees outside, it's only 99 downstairs.
I want to quote you something from Martin Luther King. This is very interesting. And he said that in order for people to condemn injustice, they have to follow 4 stages. Ascertain and point out that there is injustice going on. Secondly, once you realize that there is something going wrong, that there is oppression, go and negotiate with those who are oppressing you. What is the 3rd stage?
Muslims always seem to be talking about the injustices done to them by the outside world. But I rarely hear Muslims talking about the unfairness that exists within our own communities. I pray in a room where there is a one-way mirror so the men cannot see me. I'm told we are a distraction. I look out and I see them, but they just see a mirror. The presence of women in my mosque has been erased.
You know, when we hear khutbahs about how wonderful Islam is, all the rights it's given women, but when it comes to practicing it, we don't see it. At least I don't. It's a lot of talk. It's really wonderful talk, but it's all theory.
It wasn't theory when I was growing up. As a child, I loved going to the mosque. I was never treated differently just because I was a girl. The mosque I went to in Toronto was an old converted church. I remember spending all my holidays organizing Islamic activities. Being a Muslim was fun. I married Sami, a Muslim who, like me, enjoyed working in the community. We were married in a mosque because that's where we both felt at home. We settled in Regina, Saskatchewan. We had Mesa, Inaya, Rashad, and Zayn, 4 prairie hardy children. We take them to the mosque where they're not only learning about Islam, but also the changing attitude towards women.
In the 27 or so years since I became a Muslim, we have gone through periodic phases where a group of people will come in and convince others that there should be absolute separation of men and women, or worse yet, that women should be forbidden to go to the masjid. And they think they have evidence of sunnah for that, which really isn't. And we have to fight it every time. And each time it has to be fought, because if we don't fight it, then it might actually become permanent.
The women had prayed for years behind the men without any problems. One day I came to the mosque and there was a curtain hanging in the main prayer hall. The women were supposed to pray behind it. I joined a group of women who were praying in front of it in protest. Eventually, the men didn't have enough space and a separate room for the women was created. The world I knew was gone. The mosque was the most important part of my life, and now I didn't feel welcome there anymore. I felt a strong sense of spiritual loneliness. I've begun fantasizing about starting my own mosque. Is it even possible to change things back to the way they were before? Why did my community change so radically over a few years? I decided to travel across the country to get some answers. My first stop was to visit my brother Dutch in Toronto. In our mosque in Regina for 15 years, everything was fine. The women prayed behind the men. And then, as as things started to become more conservative, we had an imam from India come, and I did a speech on 9/11 in front of, at a university, and he gave a khutbah saying Muslim women cannot speak to men unless they're behind a curtain. It's 100% haram, a speech, right? So he's telling the entire congregation this. I feel like this isn't as clear-cut as other issues are, that being a man has a lot to do with how you feel about this issue and how you interpret things.
I suggest you be very, very careful.
Why? Why are you worried about
Because
this?
you're going to make a lot of enemies.
Why?
You know how it is.
Why would it upset Muslims for me to show that Muslims are not really acting like proper Muslims? Because
any negative media we get, how much of a problem it is, especially if it comes from a Muslim. That's even worse.
No, but I think it's better because a Muslim would actually show that this is not Islamic, whereas a non-Muslim doing it would say, look how Muslim men oppress Muslim women.
Yeah, but the way they look at it is, well, non-Muslim people will be seeing this too. You're giving us a bad name, not that we already don't have one.
I went with my mom to her favorite mosque in Mississauga. She comes here almost every day to pray. She grew up in Pakistan where women never went to the mosque.
No, it's not क्यों छोड़ रही है इतने बच्चों को neglect करो forever.
But they're okay there with some.
No, you think it's okay. ना बच्चे inside क्या feel करते हैं? Where's our mother?
My mom and I have never seen eye to eye about barriers. She's never understood why they've upset me so much. You know how much I hate barriers and curtains.
तो तू उस masjid में ना रहना.
But I don't know, I love this masjid.
तो ये ठीक है इस तरह का?
Yeah, I like this barrier because it's short, it's see-through. Yeah. What do you think? Do you like it?
Yeah, I like this. I don't like a put curtain.
You don't like the curtain?
I like this one.
What about in Pakistan? When you were growing up, did you go into the mosque?
Never.
Why? Why?
Because I don't know, there's not a single woman goes to, because there are so many men and masjids are not big enough and they don't have even proper place.
No, but they felt that women didn't belong in the mosque, right? Right?
No, actually I didn't hear that either, but I don't know, women don't like either.
Why don't they like to go? Because you know why they don't want to go? Because they're not welcome. Men don't want them there, so they make it difficult for them to go. Can't you admit when you came to this country where they welcomed you into the masjids and didn't have these cultural hang-ups? This is where you learned Islam?
Yeah,
is this the country that you learned Islam?
Yeah, we gain more because we are coming to the mosque. Where will you learn if you won't come to the mosque?
And the masjids without the barriers are better for women.
If there is some women feel comfortable, let them stay behind the barrier, and I don't mind.
You don't mind the barrier?
No. If it happens that people who may put in the barrier, I don't want to fight with them.
But you would rather go to a mosque without a barrier?
Yeah.
See, you admit it.
Yeah.
You admit it. There are over 1,000 mosques in North America. Approximately 140 are in Canada. In 1994, 52% of mosques had curtains or partitions. By 2000, that number had gone up to 66%. One of those mosques is in Winnipeg. I talked to Jenna DeSantis and Shahina Siddiqui about their feelings. So tell me, when it first started, what did it look like?
Well, in the late 1980s, I guess.
Yeah.
It started.
I didn't come until 13 years ago, so that wasn't long ago.
Right.
And when I came, there was only a knee-high partition. I think they were going through the transition, but Sister Shahina was here before that small partition.
But I think that was just the beginning of wanting to build this.
Yeah.
The first reaction was someone went through an awful lot of trouble in this mosque, incredible amount of trouble to make sure that they couldn't see women. This was clearly probably the most well thought out design of any structure in this whole building.
Didn't they at one time try to even nail this?
They did. Last year sometime, they nailed it shut from the top and the sides so that the children or the women couldn't open it up. Because it's up to us to open it up from that side. We came in one day and we noticed we couldn't open any of them. So we made such a fuss that they opened some up, but if you go around, there's still one little piece of wood as evidence that that's what they did, so we're not lying.
And if you look through here, look what we see. And even then, that is not acceptable. And if you are doing a PowerPoint, over and over at projector, like, I mean, this is crazy.
There used to be, in the very beginning, no barrier at all.
At the beginning, yeah, there was no barrier. I mean, I wasn't here, but
Right.
yeah.
And were you here when the barrier started getting built?
Well, okay. I was here when the barriers was erected, I guess. This one. I don't like to call it barrier.
What do you like to call it?
Let's call it partition.
Okay, when the partition went up.
Barrier remind me of that wall there, they're building out there, you know, and in the occupied territories is a wall of apartheid or a wall of occupation, wall of, you know, so partition.
A partition. A partition.
It's a demarcation.
Right.
Demarcation between men and women, basically. They're, it's a
And
demarcation. I mean, women, they can come here as long as there's no man here. I mean, there's no, you know, in Islam, mixing is not encouraged. I mean, there's no mixing between the sexes, you know, and there are a lot of kind of reasons for that.
I am very comfortable praying behind the barrier. As we know in Islam, it's I think it's closer to piety. Like there are so many other things where we can just, you know, we talk with men, we work with men, everything. But when it comes to pray, you need more concentration. It's much better when I pray with the whole concentration, not knowing that anybody is looking at me or I can be looked upon. I feel more comfortable.
I have the same feeling. We have this curtain thing for a long time. We never have this problem to have it or not. And I'm surprised why it's a problem now.
To me, it's really culture and sexism and chauvinism. And yes, there are some who try so hard to show from the Quran that this is valid, but it's not, because if it was, it would have always been. And especially in the time of the Prophet, and it wasn't. You know, they are growing up thinking and believing that this is what Islam is all about, this is how we should behave in the mosque.
I've never found any other religion which gave women such a elevated, you know, social status, and I'm like, wow, this is what I want to be. Forget about women's lib. It's better. But unfortunately, I didn't know 13 years ago that every community had issues like this.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't come here often, unfortunately.
And that's really sad, because it used to be a very alive masjid.
Oh God, I
Before,
remember
yeah.
when this was halfway and I first converted, I was like, wow. It's not like a Catholic church where you have to sit on benches and you know, with your family. It was more comfortable for me. I sat in a row with women, I listened to the speech, and when everybody got up to pray and everybody did everything in unison, I was like, wow, this makes my heart beat. And it was like a heartbeat. But then when they put a barrier up, I'm like, what did I do wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. I was trying to pray.
Islam is religion of moderation, religion, it's a middle ground, you know, so we adopt the middle ground solution. This is, I would consider it a middle ground, you know, because the design.
How do you consider it middle ground if during the time of the Prophet there were no barriers? And that was the best time,
well, you know,
the best
it's
solution.
the best time, the best people, you know.
But they had problems.
The
men
best
used
time,
the men
the
used
best
to look at the
people
women,
there.
though.
We can't compare to them now.
But why can't we? Was this society free of problems that ordinary people faced?
For centuries, Islam dominated the world in their achievements. They were the greatest military power on earth. The greatest scientists and philosophers came from this civilization.
Whoa, wait a minute. The glories of the Muslim world have long since passed, and the one legacy that has remained stubbornly in place is the seclusion of women. For me and many other women, the true golden age of Islam was the time of the Prophet. Where did this come from? Like, why did we go from this egalitarian society and rapidly degenerate?
The degeneration of Muslim society in the 19th and 20th century is a reality that Muslim intellectuals and secular intellectuals acknowledged. But I think the really important point is that some of the greatest thinkers in the Muslim world, some of the greatest Muslim reformers of the 20th century, saw that the secret of the continuing decadence of the Muslim world was the disempowerment of women and the subjugation of women and the segregation of women from society, such that they had become the incapacitated lung. It's always important to see things in terms of their time and place.
The Hadith are a collection of narratives that describe the early Muslim community. After the Quran, the Hadith are the most important source of knowledge in Islam. I talked to Sheikh Abdullah Adhami, a world-renowned Islamic scholar who specializes in Hadith literature. I wanted to find out what the narratives have to say about barriers in mosques during the time of the Prophet.
By the grace of God, I was blessed to go over all these narratives in their entirety, meaning the whole works and their major corpuses. And, so by the grace of God, it's really an incredible honor to go through these narratives, not just for this purpose, but finding and calling what all these gems in them is quite incredible bounty.
How do we know that they weren't barriers during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him? Like in the time of, say, Medina, when the community had matured spiritually?
Some men used to retreat in the prayer lines so that they could be close to the women, to the lines of the women. And so the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, the best lines of the men are those in front. This is explicit context, of course, but it's a very general narrative. And there are many instances like this. They're very small vignettes. They're not really about the barrier because it was never an issue. It was never an issue.
There are lots of hadiths which show that barriers didn't exist at the time of the Prophet. For example, some men had clothes that were so short the Prophet asked the women to delay their rising from prostration. This gave the men enough time to pull their shirts down. If a woman had trouble hearing in the mosque, it was no big deal to ask a man to repeat what was said. In fact, women could even speak up in the mosque. Omar, the second caliph, tried to limit the mahr, which is a monetary gift a man gives to a woman before marriage. A woman spoke up and challenged Omar with a verse from the Quran. Women also had active social lives outside the mosque. They participated in the military. Omar even appointed a woman to be an arbiter in the marketplace, which was a very public area. And men who were away on missions were ordered to return to their homes within 4 months to satisfy the needs of their wives. But aren't those examples that the problems of fitna that the men are so worried about today, that the men will look at the beautiful women, the women will see us, all those issues that they worry about actually happened during the time of the Prophet?
Yes, they did.
And he never dealt with it with a physical barrier. He never, ever dealt with it.
That's a beautiful point. That's exactly the point. As a matter of fact, the Prophet, peace be upon him, there's so much evidence for the lack of barrier. The so-called legal scholars assume positions that it is categorically forbidden for a woman to travel by herself for any purpose. So you mean to tell me that all these masters who are women imams, who traveled the Muslim world, they were teachers in the public masajid?
Were they behind curtains?
No.
No?
Some of them were on the mimbar themselves. Fatima bint Abbas was so eminent in her time. She was a contemporary of Ibn Taymiyyah. And she taught from the mimbar.
She sat on the mimbar and she talked to the men.
She taught men and women.
And did she?
No.
And her face was uncovered.
Yeah.
And was she an old woman? Some men say to me, "Oh well, she's probably so old it didn't."
No, she was very young actually. The women of Medinan society actually were more revolutionary than their granddaughters in the modern Muslim world.
91% of Muslims living in Canada were born and raised in Muslim countries. Only 10% actually grew up here. I'm a minority in my own community. This means that mosques cater to many Muslims who are used to barriers. So where does this leave women of my generation? I went with my friends to listen to Professor Asma Barlas, who talked about the importance of equality in Islam.
There is not a single verse that suggests that men's gender roles are a function of their biology or that biological differences between men and women make them unequal. Now, it is true that the Quran treats women and men differently with respect to certain issues, but that doesn't mean that it establishes them as being unequal. We will be unable to change anything unless, as the Quran says, we begin by changing what is in our own hearts and by opening them to the truth.
Islam views women as spiritual equals, but Muslim men do make many distinctions, and that's what frustrates women of my generation.
I find it absurd to be made to feel that some brother in the congregation might find the sight or sound of me arousing when I have a 17-year-old son, and that's the median age of the guys in the congregation. I mean, if you find me arousing, you've got problems I can't help you with. I'm not interested.
But I remember in the MSA, it's during Jummah when I was an undergraduate, there was an issue about even what was being announced in the Friday Jummah. They used to announce sisters swimming, happening in a building. And some of the men objected because it created images in their minds. Now, why they're coming to prayer and their mind is in the gutter is another story. But, even the very mention of something relating to women being publicly announced was considered to be an interruption for these men or distracting. And, I think that we have for too long allowed these kinds of excuses to silence us and to subjugate us.
I think there's this unsurmountable fear of, when the women start speaking, the doors of the mosques will be collapsing. And we need to appease that. We need to address that. We're reclaiming our space.
In this culture, whatever segregation might mean in some other culture, here it means inferiority.
And here it is a system of gendered apartheid.
Yeah, I mean, there is such a pressure not to air the dirty laundry. But the fact that some people are coming out and airing it, to me, I think is a very hopeful sign.
Wow. If you're really doing prayer, all right, if you're really in communion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, somebody should be able to walk by in a bikini and it's not going to faze you. It's childish. And it's really degrading to men to say that men are so weak that they can't resist a little, look here or there. I mean, it's very degrading. And men who say that about each other, that's horrible. How can a man think so little of his fellow man?
Apparently I was wrong. Apparently there's not 15,000 people here today. I'm sorry. Apparently it's something more like 25,000 people. A woman who I'm very proud to call a friend and comrade, UBC student and PSG member, Itrat Syed. Let's welcome her.
We are here to say that we refuse to believe the lies they tell us. We refuse to be lulled into silence and complicity by the fairy tales they construct, where the world is divided between the uncivilized demon hordes of the East and the noble civilized armies of the West. We are here to say that we refuse to believe in a world divided by fear and hate.
Itrat Syed has always had a voice in the non-Muslim world, but she finds it more difficult to be heard in her own community.
My activism within the Muslim community is not all that I do in the world, right? I also have been working in the anti-violence movement for like 7 or 8 years. I also, am a feminist in the world and deal with feminist issues outside of the Muslim community. And I could talk any feminist, I could talk a circle around any feminist. So the idea that is this rolling?
حي للصلاة حي للصلاة حي للفلاح حي للفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
If you're sitting in a separate prayer hall and you're looking over to where the actual congregation is, it is a sense that you're not part of that congregation. You can't participate. You can send a note on a piece of paper to be read downstairs to ask a question.
But that's not the same thing as being able to stand up and being able to speak and be heard. And that's like a big part of why it feels so, why it doesn't sit well with so many women that I know, that it feels so uncomfortable and so, and that we feel so excluded. And as a result, a lot of women of my generation, I think, have left the organized community. It's not something that I can completely divorce myself from, but it's something that I have to struggle with. What is the meaning given to this? Why is this deemed to be necessary? What does this say about how we understand women and how we understand women's bodies? And I think that implicit in this need that people feel for segregation is an understanding that women's bodies are in and of themselves inherently offensive.
In the original Suri mosque, women weren't allowed in at all. After the mosque burned down, the community put pressure on the mosque leadership to allow women in the new building. Sharif Senbul is the architect hired to design the new mosque. The leadership wanted separate prayer areas for the men and women. I went upstairs with Sharif to see the women's gallery.
So this is actually, this is going to be solid?
This is it.
Solid?
This is it.
But then how will women be able to follow the prayer? They can't see down.
No, there's no visual connection down.
Then how do you pray?
Just through, it's all mic'd in. The visual connection is definitely something that they did not want in this mosque.
Oh, I see.
Specifically.
So would you say your hands were definitely tied when it came to giving women visual access to the...
Oh yeah, I wouldn't have had this as solid at all.
Rukaya, who lives in Surrey, remembers when women weren't allowed in the mosque. She's anxious to see where she'll be praying in the new building.
And this is going to be, just as you see here, solid drywall, and then there's glazing.
The glass, it'll be solid from up to here, then glass from here.
Clear glass up to the ceiling.
So what we can't do is see the khutbahs happening unless there's screens up.
You'll have to be a TV monitor because you can't see down at all.
Okay. This is just basically saying, shut up, we've given your space. Like, to me, this is what it says. But don't say that I'm not grateful. I'm very grateful. At least there's accommodations here made for women, which they had the right to have. But I don't think the room was sufficient. And I don't think it was looked upon from a women's perspective. And men may think that they know what women need, but they don't.
But the mosque that was here before didn't even let women in.
Originally they did, and then they weren't allowed. Women just backed down just because women are just naturally don't like conflict, especially with men, because men always seem to overthrow their power, I guess. I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't understand why men think that they can't be strong enough, that they can't look up. And I don't have a problem with women above the men, or women like behind the men standing. I have got no problem with that. That's not my quarrel at all. It's just be a part of a community, which was our God-given right to be, right? But I just feel so isolated like this.
Ruqayya's story is similar to many other women I spoke to. I needed to travel to a place where Muslims were talking about this issue in larger numbers. I flew to the US to attend a conference about how Muslims live in North America. Every year, the Islamic Society of North America has a conference which brings together Muslims from all over the continent. It also has the largest bazaar where you can buy the latest Islamic books, art, music, and fashions. This is also one of the few spaces where it's not considered wrong for Muslim men and women to be together. I met with some American Muslims to find out their thoughts about how to change the situation for women in mosques.
American society in itself is founded on the oppression and the subjugation of women.
Every woman not in your immediate family is taboo to you. You know, the reference that comes in is that, astaghfirullah, there's a sexual thing going on. And I think a lot of us Muslim men are hung up on what do I do with a woman who is not my wife, not my daughter, not my sister, not my mother, not my aunt.
It's not just that what do I do with this sister for sexual, what do I do with this sister who is educated? You know, and I am unskilled, and she is in authority over me in this other setting, but when we come to the masjid, you know, then now I can exert.
Yeah, but I'm not willing to give up my sanctuary.
But see, that's the thing. If you're the only one saying that, I mean, that's you're just going to be the only one standing there saying that.
No, but then we got a whole community of unmasked Muslims. They don't go to the masjid anymore. You know, you have to go dig up under rocks or have somebody special to get them to come out because they're not coming. It's not worth the aggravation.
Every day we carry Islam on our sleeves every day, you know, and we are the representation of Islam in this place here in America. And it's important that we are given the respect and the opportunity to be involved in what goes on in our masjid, our quote-unquote masjid.
People who want things to be a certain way have to stay in the trenches and make it uncomfortable for the people who want to be otherwise. If you keep leaving and opening other masajid, and if you keep keeping Friday prayers where you only listen and don't respond, you'll never have a community that is liberatable by what the Quran offers.
Right. Nowhere in the world, nowhere in the history, it shows that you can have something without a struggle. So I think every woman who has the courage of her conviction has to get up and say, no. You can ignore me as long as you want, but here I am to stay.
People who want things to be a certain way have to stay in the trenches.
Do you think it'll take Muslim women taking this complaint to, say, the Human Rights Court in order to make changes? I mean, some women are talking about that.
I really hope it doesn't go that far, and I don't think it necessarily has to go that far, because I don't think the women have actually taken the step of just going in and saying, I'm not going anywhere, you know. We back in the 60s, they were called sit-ins, but the pray-in frequently leads to more dialogue. But just quietly take your place behind the men and quietly bring your children and have them pray in front of you. And really, sometimes it just takes sitting down and talking with people in a calm and right way. But we're supposed to try first to change it with our tongue and then to change it by action.
I traveled to Morgantown in West Virginia. I read a story about Asra Namani and how she dealt with her struggles. In her mosque, women weren't allowed to enter through the front doors or pray in the main hall. Because of this, she went on to publish articles in major American newspapers. A Muslim group intervened and Asra won the right to enter through the front doors and pray in the main space. But not without a price. Asra and her family have been ostracized from their own community. I think that you are probably the first woman in North America to actually formally complain about how Muslim women are treated in mosques.
And in 2004, I mean, 2004, for me to even be in a position to have to do that is just, one, it's tragic, and then second, it's great. Because if not now, when?
So have they told you that you can now officially pray here?
They have. What we fought for the right to be able to be present.
Right.
To not hide just behind that wall.
So that's where they would have wanted you, up in the balcony?
Yeah.
So now, after you filed the complaint with CARE and ISNA got involved,
yeah.
Where's your space? Where do you pray?
So we've marked off this space over here, just symbolically. The men all gather for the khutbah around us, sort of, and then we have this space, and it's great. I mean, to me, it's good coexistence. You know, my mother never went to the mosque. It was always my dad's place, and it was a door through which she never stepped. And she's been going with me every Friday, and she goes with me when we go pray other times. She stands shoulder to shoulder with me, and it's not just that, like, she's my mother then and I'm her daughter. We're two women basically in this effort to try to really seize ourselves within our community, be ourselves, and capture all of that. She has been the one standing beside me the most.
Well, I'm not really very satisfied when I go there. I don't feel like I am in a very peaceful place. I do pray there, and and I don't get any kind of welcome there. No greetings, even from friends that we have known since the last 25 years. They don't even acknowledge us in the mosque. So it just makes me sad, where my own Muslim brothers don't even acknowledge me. What am I doing wrong there? I question myself. Am I a sinner in that place?
You really like to get into people's faces and make change by really being radical. And you feel that that's too much, and that might cause a backlash.
Exactly. That's what I think.
Do you think that is it respectful for them to like not let us speak, like when we wanted to speak from the balcony? Like, or I feel like that's like a violation of my fundamental Islamic right to participation. Like they got me up in a balcony. They won't let a woman even do her shahada into a microphone because they've decided that the voice of a woman. I mean, what we're doing here, like even sitting here and speaking, was illegal, according to their estimation 6 months ago.
I think like people like you who has power, like can bring changes. Like, you know, maybe ordinary people like me won't be able to bring the changes that much, but like you can. But like if you have that patience, like, you know, accepting their values, like men and women has to respect each other to come to an agreement. Like, okay, women's space in mosque is very important, but if you just like try to say like, you know, this is my way and this is your way, and like, you know, this is what I'm gonna do, like here it is, like follow me or don't follow me, like then it's like no, I don't think change is gonna last that longer.
But I hear what you're saying, but that's like assuming that they actually want to change and that they will actually do anything about it. I mean, why is it that it's like 2004 and we've had our mosque here, you know, since I was 10, right? Now I'm 38, so let's do the math, 28 years, right? And all that time, like, we haven't figured out a way to get a single woman onto the board, a single woman into the executive committee, a single woman into any kind of really active position, because it's been so much just entrenched prejudice all the time, ultimately.
You know, I mean, it's hard for our communities to take, but sometimes we have to embarrass them into doing the right thing. They should have done the right thing on their own, but,
right,
you know, there's all these complex reasons as to why they don't.
I want to just change the rule, like just change the institutional rule, just like Rosa Parks had to get the law changed in order to allow blacks to sit anywhere on the bus that they wanted to sit. And then, like, maybe slowly after 30 years, then they would get it and they would say, like, you know what, actually that wasn't so fair so long ago. But I can't wait that long. Like, I don't feel like the world can wait that long for Islam and our communities to change so slowly.
After spending time with Asra, I realized it's going to be difficult for women like us to get the changes we want. Tariq Swaydan is a management expert who writes extensively about Muslim leadership. He feels mosques are in need of improvement.
Unfortunately, there is a lack of vision. There is a lack of management in the modern sense of our masjids, our mosques. And that is why, in my opinion, we have a major problem. I was the leader of the masjid, and I was also giving the sermon. I was leading the prayer.
Right.
And I gave the order that there is no separation.
There used to be before?
Oh, yes.
What was it like?
There was a glass wall.
And the women had to pray behind the glass?
Yeah, and one-way glass wall.
Oh, just like us? And what did you do?
I asked them to come in.
the women to come, and did they want to?
Yes.
And what did the men say?
Some of them complained.
Really?
But when I showed them the sayings of the Prophet and the actions of the companions, they did not have enough knowledge to answer that. So
you actually, this is the first time I've heard this.
Yes.
As an imam of a mosque, you told the women they weren't to be in their room anymore.
They don't have to. So it is their choice where to stay. I visited the masjid about 7 years after I left, and they listened to my lecture without any curtains or glass. They came in.
That's a really uplifting story, you know. You would think that having a choice of where to pray in a mosque would seem like a simple thing to ask for. But first, you have to change the attitude of the community. The Winnipeg Muslims came together to enjoy a camp with their children. I asked Imam Hosni and my friends Nadra and Amal, former members of the Winnipeg community, to be part of a panel. I was nervous standing there trying to convince the men to take the women's frustrations about the barrier more seriously. The whole issue of where do women pray became a huge issue, you know. The big debate about could a woman be seen, could her voice be heard? And now that I'm talking to Muslim women across the country, they are telling me that it's very difficult for a Muslim woman to have her voice heard in the community. In your personal opinion, what are the negative effects of, say, a barrier in a mosque?
Okay, here we go. I don't live here anymore.
That's why you were chosen.
I think the barrier, if the women are not going to feel welcome there, the children are going to feel unwelcome, and then your community will not thrive. And it's a very serious issue. I mean, it is a metaphor, and it might reflect on the activities of the community. So I'm not sure how active the community is right now, but if the women feel they're unwelcome there, then that's a serious issue.
I think these issues are not serious issues for us Muslims. In an environment that is non-Islamic, these are the issues that non-Muslims are debating in such a way to divert us from practicing our way of life.
What I found out lately in the mosque, we are changing so many things, and women always have to push forward to be beside the man and compete with the man. That's what I noticed in our community lately. A lot of things are coming up, and they have to have their words. Like, we're not denying the woman in our community or the sister. We like to take their opinion and everything, but I think, to me, I believe in the woman. The right place for her to be is at home.
I believe in high education. Women should strive to be part of their community.
That's what I said. That's what I'm not denying what you're saying. I'm saying if everybody went to the loose, start learning more about things. Start learning more about things and getting more loose. That's what I'm saying.
I just believe that women could raise children. Women can create a country. Women should be heard. If women are at home and not heard, then how is the world going to survive? God did not create only man by himself. He created a woman for a reason.
Look after her kids, her husband, her family. That's what my own belief, and that's my strongly belief.
I don't think the major issue is the partition itself, because partition is not one of the pillars of Islam, or it will not affect the validity of the prayer. People might have different opinion, but the most important issue here that we should have a role model, and we have to make decision who's supposed to be our role model. Now, if we choose, for example, that the wives of the Prophet ﷺ supposed to be our role models, it is clearly stated in the Holy Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only recommended them, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands them to stay at home. So,
unfortunately, in many places in the Muslim world, tradition has taken over. And many people cannot separate tradition from the pure teachings of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. if we take a deep look at what was practiced in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, then we will see very clearly that there was no walls or curtains separating men from women, except in one case, and that is the wives of Muhammad ﷺ, for the reason that they are, to Muslims, are like the mothers, and they should not be looked upon except with pure hearts, and that's why they were separated. Unfortunately, many of the scholars, and later on many of the masses, have taken what is for the wives of the Prophet, our mothers, and applied it to all Muslim women. And thus, you should not talk to them except from behind a separation like a curtain or a wall. If you go and look into history, and I have done that, and if you go and look into the sayings of Muhammad ﷺ and the words of the Quran, it's very clearly this is a specific case for the mothers of the believers, the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and may Allah be pleased with them, but not for everyone else.
What do you think is the reason that Muslim men are trying so hard to separate and segregate women? Like what do you think the underlying...
Ignorance is the underlying reason. It really is. It's a cultural practice. It's what they've heard from Sheikh so-and-so and Sheikh such and such, you know, or heard from their mothers or heard from their fathers or whatever all the time they're growing up. It's cultural practices in some countries, and they just bring that here, okay? It's ignorance because if they take the time to study the Quran, if they take the time to actually study the hadiths themselves, they're going to find out that that is not the right way. And just because it's done in a so-called Muslim country does not make it Islam or Islamic.
You're really talking here about a dysfunctional culture, which is the dysfunctional Muslim culture that comes over from India or from Pakistan or from the Arab world, which is not a wholesome, sound Islamic culture.
All cultures and organized religions of the world have had to deal with dysfunction. And the challenge for Muslims is that certain patriarchal beliefs have become incorporated in the religious writings themselves.
We have created a culture that has ingrained ignorance as the status of a woman. Are we now giving legal rulings that respond to the reality that we created and saying this is the legal position of Islam?
I've always been amazed at the number of books written by men about women. It's like they're editing Islamic sources to justify their control over women. And these beliefs which promote the seclusion of women continue to be promoted in Muslim cultures all over the world.
I think we need to be honest about the question of separation. For in reality, when there is a purpose that is constructive for our coming together, the Quran enjoins the men and the women to be together in society, in social settings, because they are equally responsible to take care of the world.
For those who put curtains or walls or whatever, they have good intentions, I believe. They want to make sure that there are no desires, it's done in a pure heart, no wrongdoing is done in a place of worship. And to them, I admire their intentions, but their actions are wrong. It's a matter of knowledge. See, many people think it is not allowed.
Right.
So when you teach them, then they would understand.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, my pleasure.
Back in my mosque in Regina, changes are starting to happen.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, Sister Zarqa. How are you today?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. How are you?
This year, our community voted in a new president. He feels very strongly about changing the situation in the mosque.
So how do you feel that we can solve the problems in our community? Like, how do we go about getting reform?
They are looking for a change, a positive change where we can bring unity and we can bring people together and we can put the bylaws in order, and to make it enjoyable community. The best way is just to put the problem on the table. You look to the problem, I look to the problem, and we have two skills, the Quran and the Hadith. And I believe we will resolve all the problems, and I am not anticipating any problems in the near future.
It's only now that women are gradually becoming more active in the mosque. My friends have just been chosen to sit with men on various committees.
Enjoy the rest of the Friday prayer and have a nice day.
All right, you
Bye.
too. Assalamu alaikum. Even though I'm hopeful, I worry that the changes taking place are fragile because they're dependent on one man. It's possible a new election would bring in a president with a totally different vision of the place of women in the mosque. I've never joined the men for Friday prayer since they put up the one-way mirror. I'm nervous, so I wait until the prayer starts before going in. I love being Muslim, but I need to take breaks from going to the mosque. It wears me down. For me, the mosque is the heart and soul of the Muslim community. I want my kids, especially my daughters, to have the same sense of joy that I had growing up Muslim. I think that the only way we're going to get change is to empower the women and give them knowledge.
I suggest you're very, very careful.
I didn't know 13 years ago that every community had issues like this.
There's so much evidence for the lack of barrier.
I don't like to call it barrier.
There is such a pressure not to air the dirty laundry.
To me, I believe in the woman. The right place for her to be is at home.
What does this say about how we understand women and how we understand women's bodies?
I don't feel like the world can wait that long for Islam and our communities to change so slowly.
You can ignore me as long as you want, but here I am to stay.
Unfortunately, in many places in the Muslim world, tradition has taken over.